travel northward far enough, beyond the most distant boundaries of civilization, and the lands will begin to change. With each step, they grow more desolate, inhospitable, and surreal. The skies flare with eldritch power, and the air grows thick with sorcery. Nature rebels as its elements are torn asunder, mountains flowing like rivers into twisting, mocking grins, or torrents of lava that flow upwards to intermingle with bleeding stars. Time becomes incomprehensible, with centuries passing in days, and days that stretch and crack apart into splinters of lifetimes. The territories here are a realm of the impossible, a tangled landscape of insanity in which the dark gods reign supreme. Amidst blood and shadow, their followers war with one another for eternity, an endless carnage for the right to march south and bring war to mortal realms. And yet, there are many across the lands of the south who would deny with perfect earnestness that such a place exists. To them, the dark gods are nothing more than the ravings of madmen, and the armies that fight in their name are merely barbaric plunderers elevated to unearned heights by overly dramatic scribes and playwrights. Those who doubt the power of chaos can exist in such ignorance as to the peril that lies to the north for one reason, and one reason alone. Between the blighted wound in reality, known as the realm of chaos, and the untouched lands of the old world, there stands a great bulwark of civilization. Its strength lies not in its walls and ramparts, though great fortresses can be found there, nor in its soldiers and generals, though few armies might match their resolve. Instead, its strength arises from the spirit of the land itself. Every day, millions live their lives in peaceful ignorance to the powers that would destroy them, because any force that leaves the chaos wastes with the desire to bring war to the nations of the old world must first cross a realm of ice and faith named Kislev. The northernmost kingdom of any note in the old world, Kislev is infamous for its wild and untamed lands, which are often harsh and at times cruel to those that live there. It is a nation of rolling treeless steppes, tall grasses, and icy rivers that thunder down from the surrounding mountains into frozen seas and inlets. Its empty wilderness is broken only by lonely, isolated villages and imposing cities that rise from the plains like great islands of stone. Kislev's political borders are at times almost arbitrary, for much of its lands remain empty and beyond the reach of any governance. Yet its inhabitants maintain a strong sense and connection with their country, and an almost inherent knowledge of where it begins and ends. To the south and west, Kislev is bounded by the Empire of Sigmar Heldenhammer. The river Talabek marks some of its border, with the remainder weaving through the dark forests of Ostland. The frigid waters of the Sea of Claws mark Kislev's western coastline, while the World's Edge Mountains define its eastern extent. Its northern border is more challenging to define, for the tundra here is almost indistinguishable from that of the Troll country that lies beyond. For the sake of convenience, most scholars end Kislev's dominion at the river Lynx, though some tribes and villages are known to exist beyond it. Within these boundaries exist every manner of people. Kislev is a nation forged from warring invaders that finally settled alongside each other, and the descendants of many ancient tribes can still be found there. The Dolgan, Norse, and near-extinct Robsmen all cling to their ancient customs across the steppes, but it is the Ungols and Gospodars that dominate the modern Tzardom. The Ungols were among the first to settle Kislev, and they exist today in much the same way as their ancestors. They are nomadic shepherds and daring hunters, hardy farmers and skillful whalers. To most foreigners, the perception of Kislev begins and ends here, and the Tzardom as a whole is seen as backwards and rustic. Yet the nation contains sites of industry, architecture, and culture to rival that of any in the old world, and its cities are among the largest and most cosmopolitan. This is largely, though not entirely, the domain of the Gospodars, who form a ruling elite in Kislevite society, and tend to prevail across the nation's more wealthy southern realms. These two peoples have interwoven with one another across the centuries, and their differences may be invisible to outsiders. But Kislev, in many aspects, remains two nations, and its divisions tend to reflect enduring cultural and ethnic lines. The ever-looming threat of chaos has largely prevented any cultural dissonance within Kislev from festering, but it is the rule of the Tsarinas and the Tsars that has united its peoples as a nation-state. Since its founding, Kislev has been ruled by a hereditary monarchy and governed under a unique form of centralized autocracy. In principle, the Tsar is the embodiment of sovereign authority, with full control over the state and its people. Power is delegated to persons and institutions acting on the Tsar's behalf, within the limits of their laws, and for the common good of all Kislev. The title of Tsar also carries with it certain spiritual connotations, and those who hold it are sometimes referred to as the father or mother of the nation. Such overtones the title carries have only heightened under its current ruler. Tsarina Katerin Boka is the most powerful of the Ice Witches, strange wielders of magic who seem to draw power from the land itself. The Kislevite peasantry, and even some nobles, whisper that she may be the living reincarnation of the very first Khan queen, Miska. Such is her control over the Aether that when Katerina was coronated as the Tsarina of Kislev, the Boka palaces grew a new wing, half a mile long, made entirely of glittering ice. This is a feat beyond even the most powerful mages, and it is clear that Tsarina has a mastery over this power, unseen in generations. Within this magically woven hoarfrost meets the Ice Court. This organization predates the rule of the Tsars themselves, and has served Kislev not only as a powerful political body, but as an academy of sorts. Within, young noblewomen begin their training into the magical laws of Tempest and Ice. Those who show aptitude in such studies are named Ice Maidens and undertake a spiritual journey across Kislev to foster a strong magical connection with the lands they inhabit. From these apprentices arise the Ice Witches, the dominant practitioners of magic within Kislev. Ice Witches have no formal titles or positions and rely on an ever-changing internal organization based on bloodlines, beliefs, and status. This sisterhood has worked carefully to suppress competing studies of magic, philosophy, and religion, especially those sects that might advocate the persecution of their kind. With Tsarina Katerin both the matriarch of her line and an undisputed master of their law, the Ice Court has aligned itself closer to the throne than ever before. Outside of the sorceress Ice Court, Kislevite nobility is based on ancient Gospodar hereditary practices, preventing Ungols or smaller ethnic groups from attaining any higher formal titles. This has ensured that the Gospodars continue to constitute Kislev's ruling elite, but has at times led to discontent. A class of nobles known as the Boyars serve as powerful administrators on behalf of the Tsar, their influence on local matters often surpassing that of the members of the Ice Court itself. Lower-ranking Gospodar nobles are called the Druzina, and while this title is traditionally hereditary, it has been increasingly bestowed to individuals in return for a great service to the Tsar, or even financial contributions. This is the only noble title extended to the Boyars, and while some among them have managed to acquire even greater power and influence within the ruling class, it has almost always been on the basis of ability, and without any formal rank ascribed. Kislev's vast distances mean that the idealized version of the Tsar's governance has little basis in reality. While centralized authority is present in its largest cities, more often than not, the day-to-day administration of its lands falls to atamans, a title given to tribal chiefs. Each ataman discharges all the functions of local government, enforcing laws, settling disputes, and dictating priorities over smaller settlements called stanitsas. Atamans are supposedly selected by the Tsar, but in practice, each stanitsas possesses their own methods of selection, which are then retroactively approved within the Ice Court. Gospodar atamans are typically hereditary positions, while Ungols are most often elective. In border regions, in which conflict with raiders or bandits are more prevalent, the title might instead be given to a great warrior or strategist. Kislev lacks the convoluted system of courts present in Sigmar's empire, instead favoring simpler laws enforced with blunt effectiveness. As with other government institutions, the Tsar is the highest authority, able to overturn judgments or decree any manner of sentence. Local courts again, however, are largely autonomous and often divided along cultural lines, with the Boyars granted certain concessions to conduct their own interpretations of justice. Certain duties, namely those that deal with sophisticated internal dissent, or the machinations of the ruinous powers, fall under the jurisdiction of the Akshina. They are equal parts secret police and clandestine operatives. Their agents can be found in both Kislev's greatest cities and ranging well beyond the frontier. The only significant internal rival to the power of the Tsar is that of the state's religion. Kislevite spirituality has always been a dominant force across its lands, but one historically split across numerous divergent or competing cults. The largest of these are centered around various gods, notably Ursun, the god of bears, Daz, the god of fire and sun, or Tor, the god of thunder and lightning. Yet, Kislevite faith also holds reverence for a myriad of minor spirits that inhabit the steppes, the ice witches and their sorcerous connection to the land, or other entities that defy easy understanding. It is described often as a land with too little faith and too much superstition, and therefore vulnerable to the machinations of the ruinous powers. To centralize the Kislevite cults and codify their practices, the previous Tsar, Boris Boka, father of Catherine, created the Great Orthodoxy. Though only a generation old and rejected by many who cling to the old ways, it has nevertheless earned great power and wealth through those that chose to work within its structure. Kastalton, the supreme patriarch of the cult of Ursun, the largest faith within Kislev, has become its de facto leader and increasingly seen as a balancing force against the unrestrained power of the Tsar. Yet, the Great Orthodoxy has also upset the delicate balance between the cults, the Ice Witches, and the other Kislevite faiths, who have long feared persecution should any one of them gain political power. Yet, neither the power of the Tsar nor the faith of the Orthodoxy preserves Kislev alone. Amidst such dangerous lands, it is ultimately the Tzardom's armies that keep its would-be conquerors at bay. First among these are the famous winged lancers, fearsome horsemen adorned in the Gospodar tradition with large feathered wings that create an eerie sound when they charge. The rest of their armor is similarly elaborate, decorated as richly as each dynasty can afford, for these soldiers above all represent the pride of their homesteads. Such is the expense of outfitting and training a winged lancer in both wealth and time that only the most capable will ever enter their ranks. While most among them return to their homes during peacetime, the Griffin Legion stand apart as a permanent, professional force. Its riders come exclusively from the Gospodar nobility and fletch their wings with griffin feathers to solidify their special status. Ungolstanistas and tribes by contrast favor mounted archers. While they wear no armor and are ill-suited for frontline charges, they are exceptionally deadly nevertheless. Even among the master riders of Kislev, they have been honed and disciplined by their nomadic lifestyle, capable of feats of marksmanship equaling even that of the elves. They are expert trackers and scouts, harassing the enemy and raiding their supply lines. Kossars make up the bulk of Kislev's standing army, footmen that display equal aptitude in the use of axes, bows, and pistols, and are often armed with some combination of the three. They trace their martial history to an Ungol tribe that fought as mercenaries for the Gospodars. Today, they are made up of hunters, trappers, and foresters from both groups, yet also criminals, bored younger sons, and general troublemakers. Becoming a Kossar is often seen as a way of renouncing other ties and escaping a difficult past. Accordingly, their reputation is checkered, but all are fearsome in battle. Supporting the Kossars are the Streltsy, which in legend were once Kossars themselves. Yet while fighting beside the regiments of the Empire, they witnessed the use of black powder and were forever changed. In modern Kislev, they are the foremost masters of firearms, employing unique long-barreled rifles with blades on their stocks so they might be equally effective in a melee. Such soldiers are the most common within the armies of Kislev, but during times of great peril, rarer, stranger forces might be marshaled alongside them. The Sisterhood of the Ice Guard, warriors of the Ice Court, wield blades as cold as the deepest winters, equally effective against men, or even the largest creatures of the old world. Patriarchs of the Orthodoxy spouting fiery sermons, Ice Witches and Frost Maidens commanding the power of winter itself, and the unbreakable regiments of the Tsar's personal guard might all likewise be marshaled. Warbears are used as mounts or to pull sleds, while trained snow leopards stalk forests and seem to take great delight in hunting trolls, minotaurs, or other beasts of chaos. Even artillery, a weapon not normally associated with Kislev, might be used in great numbers, with Little Grom, a cannon derived from one of the last of the 12 Thunderers, delivering blasts of fire comparable to the largest guns of the dwarves. Yet the greatest threat to any invading force might be the lands of Kislev themselves. Every army that marches to war must contend with issues of supply and endure the hardship of the seasons. But in Kislev, such affairs become vital. In winter, a biting chill descends on invaders, cracking armor and flesh alike. In the spring, the roads and fields turn to mud so deep that even chariots and war machines might wholly disappear beneath them. In fog, mists, and blizzards, strange shapes might be seen, the silhouettes of enormous creatures rallying against those who might defile their homeland. This connection between the Kislevites and their lands runs throughout all their history, to the creation of the nation itself. The Gospodar, considered the founders of Kislev, were originally a nomadic people that roamed the vast eastern steppes. They competed with the other tribes of the grasslands, the Hung and Kurgans, but also increasingly the worshippers of the ruinous powers and those corrupted by them. Until, in time, the Gospodars were the last tribe of the steppe, not enslaved to chaos. Yet, even when endowed with powerful gifts by their bear god Ursun, and fierce as their warriors were, the Gospodar could not endure forever. In their desperate need, it is said that a shaman priestess among their number heard the whispers of a great spirit. It promised her immense power, enough to stand against the dark gods if she swore to lead her people to the west. Across the World's Edge Mountains was a frozen realm where the spirit lay trapped and dormant, waiting to be freed. Granted godlike powers and sorcery, this priestess united the disparate clans of the Gospodars, leading a vast exodus from the eastern steppe as their first Khan queen, known then, now, and forever as Miska the Slaughterer. The Khan Queen is said to have wept tears of ice when the great journey was completed, and she witnessed the new homeland of her people for the first time. Yet, while the Great Spirit had promised these lands to her, they had already been claimed by the Ungals. These chiefly nomadic horsemen had held back the greenskins and other foul creatures of the old world for generations, but against the newcomers were outmatched. Under the Khan Queen, the Gospodars possessed an unmatched genius in warfare until the great Ungol bastion of Prague was conquered and the surrounding lands pledged fealty. The Gospodars expanded westwards, even taking territory from the lands of the Empire while it was distracted by its own internal strife. Kislev's modern borders had taken shape, but the Khan Queen Miska would not remain to see the land she had conquered rise to become a nation. Beset by visions of a terrible future in which she would once again lead her people to salvation, she ventured into the north, perhaps into the realm of chaos itself, never to be seen again. Her ancient blade, known as Fearfrost, symbol of her power, was left to her daughter, Shoika. Taking the title of Tsarina to better reflect her new position, Shoika founded the city of Kislev, for which her Tzardom would be named. Her inauguration instigated the start of the Gospodaran calendar, and within 2 years, she had conquered the last stronghold of the Ungols, the port city of Norvod, renamed Erengrad. Together with Prague and the new capital city of Kislev, these settlements grew rich and powerful. The Ungols came to accept Gospodar rule, and the first concept of a united Kislevite people took root. For over 7 centuries, the bloodlines mingled, and the structure of the nation was solidified. 774 years after its founding, in the year 2301 of the imperial calendar, Kislev faced the threat of annihilation as the forces of chaos marched southwards. Raids and skirmishes with the forces of the ruinous powers had always been common, but united under the powerful Kurgan chieftain, Avasar Kul, the assembled forces were the largest seen since the first arrival of chaos into the world. The defenders of Kislev and their allies in the empire that rallied against Kul were massacred. Prague was attacked and destroyed after months of fierce resistance, leaving the country almost undefended. With the capital of Kislev threatened, Tsar Alexis Romanov sent out a plea for aid, but every force that marched north was annihilated. All hope seemed lost, but under the glow of a twin-tailed comet, a new power was arising within the embattled empire. As Kislev itself was besieged, a vast imperial host, united under the legendary Magnus the Pious, marched to the relief of the city. The ensuing battle was the largest the Old World had ever seen, until the forces of Chaos and Avasar Kul had been destroyed between the combined might of the vengeful Kislevite defenders, the armies of Magnus, the magic of the High Law Master Teklis of distant Ulthuan, and a contingent of dwarves who had held the gates of Kislev until the relief force arrived. Victory in the Great War against Chaos had preserved the Tzardom of Kislev, but the country was never the same. For over a century, its lands remained barren, its cities in ruin, and its country depopulated. Without the means to fully patrol Kislev's lands, every manner of cult and beast found refuge in its borders. Even its Tsar was not above predation, with Katerin, henceforth known as the Bloody, transformed into a dreaded vampire and conducting a secret massacre of her own people. Her son, Tsar Pavel, ended this reign of terror, but could not reverse the nation's fortunes. It was only in the year 964, or 2491 by the imperial calendar, that a Tsar finally began to restore the kingdom's distant glories. Tsar Boris Bokar was a fiery, passionate warrior, and the example he set for his people, driving back goblins, beastmen, and trolls, lifted the nation's spirits. Though it nearly bankrupted his family and the fortunes of several other noble houses, bridges, roads, and towns were restored, and black powder weapons forged with knowledge and craftsmen borrowed from the empire. Eager to reclaim the kingdom of his ancestors, the power of the Tsar was felt again across the vast lands of Kislev. The cult of Ursun, slowly overtaken by the worship of Ulrich, Tal, and other foreign gods, was similarly restored, and the great orthodoxy founded to cement the Kislevite faith. His famous taming of a wild bear, recognized as a sign from Ursun, is perhaps the most repeated aspect of his reign, but the wealth and prosperity he returned to Kislev is the most enduring. Tsar Boris was ultimately killed while leading a force of horsemen in the still turbulent northern regions of Kislev, 26 years after his coronation. The nation's grief was only heightened by the fact his body was never recovered and a proper burial could not take place. His daughter, Tsarina Katerin, has ruled ever since, and she has proven to be a very different Tsar. Where Boris was passionate and exuded a great, unrestrained warmth, Katerin is said to be detached and joyless, named the Ice Queen not only for her mastery of magic. Where her father ruled the nation by example, the Tsarina prefers her agents and generals, and only takes to the battlefield during extraordinary circumstances. This is in no part due to a lack of love for her people though, or a weaker martial spirit, for Katerin is wholly dedicated to her nation, the most dangerous individual in Kislev, and likely much of the Old World. Yet, her rule is not without challenge. Internally, the divide between the Ice Court and the Great Orthodoxy is growing, and the Supreme Patriarch Kastaltin has even declared Katerin's rule heretical and illegitimate. Beyond Kislev's borders, the Dark Gods are marshalling again in the Chaos Wastes, and the forces at their command eclipse even those of Avasar Kul's at the height of his power. Another great war against Chaos is imminent, and fanatical priests cry out in the streets that the end times have begun. Yet, whatever terrible plans exist for the conquest of the Old World, whatever ruinous powers have gathered in the northern wastes, however vast their armies or monstrous their champions, all must first cross the imperceptible border into the realm of the Ice Queen. Here they will find only death and the truth of the ancient words. Those who come to Kislev by the sword shall perish.
Thank you to Creative Assembly for supporting investigation into the Tzardom of Kislev. Join us on our Twitch channel on February 14th, where we'll be leading the Tsarina to absolute victory in marathon stream of Total War Warhammer 3. We'll be previewing other factions and nations in the meantime there, so be sure to follow us on Twitch if you haven't already, by cracky. Ah, damn it, I lost the accent.